So that plane is floating around somewhere. Yeah.
Once Steve gets back, we're going to start.
Do you want me to connect this onto the mic stand? One of them?
Birdie?
Mr. Alabama, how are you? I don't see you. Hope you brought enough to share it, Chris.
Couple of weeks. Okay, let's call to order the August 19th New Garden Township Board of Supervisors business meeting. So if we could all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have not had any executive session since our last meeting. So we're going to move on to public comment, and I have one card from Cindy Hiles. Cindy?
Please indulge me while I read my comments. I'm not very comfortable with public speaking. My name is Cindy Hiles. From 1985 to 2021, my family and I were residents of New Garden Township, and I currently reside in nearby Newark, Delaware. In April of 2019, I approached the Open Space Review Board to inquire about interest in preserving our property at 308 Penn Green Road rather than selling to a developer. After what I'll politely refer to as a roller coaster ride, the township acquired 308 Penn Green December 16th of 2021 to be preserved in perpetuity and be accessible to all residents. Throughout the process, I was told I would be involved in the future plans for the property. I was also told I could build and place a bench on the property in memory of my late husband. I would think that the township would recognize that I'm a valuable and free resource with extensive knowledge of the structures, the physical plant, and the land, but they have chosen to exclude me for the last 2 years and 8 months. Shortly after the acquisition, a locked chain posted no trespassing was placed across the driveway, and the open space remains inaccessible to the community. I know that occasionally folks walk the trails, including, I am told, a current supervisor who walks their dog there. March 20th of 2023, I addressed this board during public comment requesting an update on the progress at 308 Penn Green. The chairperson responded saying someone would contact me after the meeting to provide updates. To date, I have not received a text, a phone call, or an email from anyone affiliated with New Garden Township, another 17 months wasted. Recently, I was approached by a group of like-minded individuals who share my original vision for utilizing the existing structures on the property to create an arts, heritage, nature center. I wholeheartedly support the exploration of this concept, creating a multifunctional township amenity by a group of volunteers at no expense to this township. Some of the individuals were to have addressed this board tonight, but were abruptly removed from the agenda. To my extreme disappointment over this weekend, I came across publicly posted minutes from the April 19th, 2024 Parks and Rec Board meeting. I'll just give you a brief excerpt from those minutes during the general discussion. Hiles property on Penn Green, super neat 8-acre property with multiple outbuildings. Big questions, thoughts of what to do with the property and the buildings. Board would like to meet there to better brainstorm. Keeping buildings could be good potential. Can Historic Society or a Friends of group help with liability? Keep this on the DL to minimize exposure until a plan is in place. So now I've found my answer as to why no one could provide me with an update that I publicly requested. You wish to keep things on the down low. The May and June Parks and Rec agendas both listed the Hiles property, but to date, those minutes have not been uploaded to the township website for public viewing. The Pennsylvania Sunshine Law requires prompt public access to meeting minutes. Keep things on the down low. Wow. As I stated, I am no longer a resident of New Garden, but Landenberg and 308 will forever be part of my heart and soul. It is painful beyond words to see the property wither and remain closed to your community. At this point, I deeply, deeply regret my decision to partner with New Garden Township to become the newest steward of 308 Penn Green Road. In my humble opinion, investigating the potential that lies untapped on these 8 pristine, or shall I say super neat, acres along the wild and scenic White Clay Creek is a scale much more manageable than those proposed projects on the St. Anthony's property. The Board of Supervisors owes it to New Garden residents to let public investigation move forward. I still keep tabs on New Garden from my nearby home in Newark. From what I have witnessed lately, it appears to me that New Garden and this Board of Supervisors could use a win. Can't we just all work together for the same common goal? I will not apologize for my frustrated tone. It has been almost 3 years. I also realize that these public comments will probably irritate a number of people. I figured I would take that risk since I have been I could not be alienated any further than I already have at this point. Thank you. I'd also like to approach with some information for Mr. Himes and Mr. Buck.
Thank you, Cindy. Anyone else have public comments? Nope. Okay. All right. Any public comments on agenda items specifically? Nope. Okay. We did the public hearing at 5. Do we have any recognitions? Yep. Okay. The presentation was from Michael Baker, just wrapped up at 6 o'clock. And we have meeting minutes from the July 15th. Do we have a motion to approve? I'll make a motion. Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? Yep. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Yep. Okay, we have a paid invoices in the amount of $135,037.81 and unpaid invoices in the amount of $1,079,460.66 for a total of $1,214,498.47. Do I have a motion to approve those invoices? Okay, need a second?
Yeah, there are one invoice for my employer, for services that were rendered to the township. I will recuse from that invoice.
Okay, do we have a second? Okay, all right. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we have public safety reports with Avondale Fire Company has none. And the Southern Chester County Regional Police has none. Just so people are aware, we're moving to quarterly reports. We're not going to be doing monthly.
Correct, yeah, we did a quarterly update at the, I think it was July last meeting, and then we'll do another one in the fall, and then one at the end of the year. Well, I guess, and technically first at the beginning of January 25. Yep.
Right, okay. All right, any unfinished business? I don't think so. Nope. Moving on to new business, we have escrow release for 144 Sharp Road in the amount of $8,187.69. Do we have a motion to approve the escrow release?
I will make the motion.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any other discussion? All right, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Yep. All right, and then we have two zoning hearing board applications. The first one for 600 and 601 Industrial Drive.
This is an appeal from, sorry. This is an appeal from the decision of the zoning officer. The applicants believe that a 1982 plan, which identified a use as in, or the land as industrial, should be grandfathered, even though the use there is residential now. The zoning officer's opinion was that it was not a use that was pre-existing non-conforming. They appealed from that to the zoning hearing board. The planning commission voted unanimously to support the township zoning officer, and I would recommend that the board take a position adverse to this request for relief, and that Robert and I attend the hearing.
How do people feel about that? Making a motion?
I'll recuse.
Okay, Christie. As her husband's on the zoning hearing board. Do we have an opinion on what we should be,
I'm recommending, and Robert is recommending, that you take a position against the application, because Robert has given them his opinion that it is not a pre-existing non-conforming use.
Right.
And I agree. I think he's correct. And they have appealed that to the zoning hearing board. So the planning commission has recommended that you support your zoning officer's action in this, and I would agree with them, I think.
do we have a second then? Nope. So hold on,
Okay.
so that fails then, since there was no second. So do we have a different motion?
Just to clarify, we're talking about Maple Lane, right?
Yes.
No, we're talking about this,
Oh,
the
sorry.
industrial one.
Industrial lane.
Oh, okay.
Industrial Drive.
The second one.
Yes, we did, yeah, the second one, the 600 industrial.
I'll make the motion that we, go with the solicitor's recommendation for the zoning officer and the solicitor to attend the hearing and oppose the application based on, their opinions that it is not pre-existing.
Okay, do we have a second to that?
Seconded.
Any other further discussion? No? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nope. Okay, now we'll move on to 174 Maple Lane. Sorry about the confusion.
So this is a 5-acre property, and the request is to subdivide it into 3 lots. There are 2 residential dwellings on the single parcel now. The proposal is to create a lot for each one of them and a third. The variance relief is dimensional. It's, the property is approximately 11 feet too narrow. The planning commission recommended that you support this application. because it really is de minimis and it is a dimensional variance. So there.
The memo has two different addresses. One says 174 Maple Lane, and then down below it says 147 Maple Lane. Do
It-
we know which
it-
one's right?
That may be dyslexia. I think it's,
No, it should be the 147. We just had 174.
yeah.
Oh.
147, so it's on the other side of Maple Lane. It's on the side, the Tough Kenneman side. The 170.
It would be on
it
the
adjoins-
south side.
It adjoins Willow Street.
Yeah. It's Register's property is
Correct.
who it is.
146.
Yeah. But the 174 was one we just had.
Okay, yeah, so just
Backward.
left over from the, yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Sorry for the confusion.
Mhm.
But it's pretty simple, straightforward.
Your opinion, it would, I mean, since it's a dimensional variance, Robert, it is de minimis, it's 11 feet.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And you're talking 11 feet and it's at, it's just because of the building setback, but everything else is fine.
Okay. All right, so you want to have a motion? Anyone else want to speak on behalf of the applicant?
Given the fact that this is a dimensional variance and it's de minimis, it's not a use variance. They're entitled to the use. It's just they don't have enough road frontage.
Correct.
If I'm following.
Road frontage and at the building envelope,
Correct.
because in the ordinance, it specifies both road frontage and at the building envelope.
And they're not asking for setback relief for the building itself.
Nope.
So I would then support the application. That would be my motion.
All right, do we have a second to support the motion? Okay, any other discussion? Christie recuses? Then, all right, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay. Nope. Okay, then we have 3 grant resolutions.
What you have are two forms of the resolution. One of them is a form of the resolution to be certified that you took this action, and the other is just the regular resolution approving it. There are 3 grants, Greenways, Trails and Rec Program for 250, multimodal transportation grant of $322,070, and that was 250,000, not just 250 that I mentioned. And then the last one is $1 million for the statewide local share assessment grant.
And and we'll put this in the performance update component of it later. This is part of the overall grant strategy to help implement the Smedley Master Plan. And so these are just 3 supplemental grants that had kind of a significant RA that the township chose to kind of invest its time, energy, and effort to apply for. This is just more of a administrative action we need to show that we are kind of the certifying officials designated for the grant support. And then from there, doesn't necessarily mean we get the full grant amounts. It's just to kind of formulate a strategy to help kind of combine multiple grant resources to get that master plan underway.
Should we take action individually or can we do them as a lump
You can
Uh,
do them
for
in
the
a
same
month.
property?
Yeah, I
You
think
can,
fine.
what would be all 3 grant resolutions as
Just
as
identify
delineated.
them by number.
Yep.
I'll make a motion that we adopt the resolution, and these are all for the Smedley Preserve. Would be resolution 2024-14, 2024-15, and 2024-16.
Do we have a second?
A second.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
And Chris, do you have those for us to sign this evening while we're here?
Now we can sign them legally.
It's the
Okay.
second page of each, if you just want to quietly work on that.
Yeah.
All right, then we have the Act 205 pension plan for fiscal year 2025 next.
Correct. So this is in advance of kind of the prior fiscal year. Part of an administrative component is the chief administrative official informing their elected body of the minimum municipal obligation for their pension plans a year prior. So this is just the amount that we are going to be required to put into our kind of just pension contribution for FY25 planning purposes. And that number, I can't remember off the top of my head. Let me pull it up here. Would be in the amount of 145, 124. This is a planned increase, obviously, from kind of the last year to this year due to the kind of community development staff officials that we added into the plan as well, too. So this is part of the overall financial component for the staffing increase. If you have any questions.
I don't have any questions. You guys? Nope. Okay.
Okay.
All right. We've been.
And there's
informed.
really no approval really required. It's more of an informational item.
We have been advised.
Okay.
You were.
Next up, we have the New Garden Township Department Performance Report.
Yes, let me just pull this up real quick.
You're good.
All right, good evening, members of the board, residents, staff, Chris Himes, Township Manager. I'll be going over the year-to-date department performance report. We did this in the earlier part of the, I guess, summer, late spring as terms of a quarterly update. We had a few months go by since the last update. So this is just part of a routine intermittent update of township performance that we provide in our monthly director reports as well, just in terms of tracking the township is doing. I'm gonna turn the reverb down here if I'm talking too loud, so I don't get that echo. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and hop right into it. So right now, going into the first view here, Public Works. Essentially at the very beginning of the year, we showed kind of that, was it 3 extra bodies for FTE count for Public Works? It kind of led to pretty much kind of a correlated bump up in productivity as well. You know, we're still seeing those numbers overall. It's just over the course of the last few months, we had to kind of divide and conquer, I guess more divide more so than conquer in terms of just attention on stormwater related issues due to the severity of the storms that we got, as well as preparation for the paving program, which is kind of an all hands effort in each individual effort, body of work there. So you can see kind of right now, we're leaning very heavy reflective of that significant uptick in storm water kind of, I'll call it maintenance, if you will, which includes not only responding to the storms, but also the inspections that we have as well. And that's why you can kind of see the pie chart kind of skew more to the stormwater side. The paving program is set to complete, I think, by the end of the month, Kenny, if I'm wrong on that one. So what you'll see due to the inordinate amount of time and expense on that one is pie chart will definitely invert itself into being more reflective of road conditions as well too. And that's also why you see this kind of big jump in stormwater component for the month of June, July. So that's just really kind of tracking what we saw in terms of just events in the township and the effort required in order to do the kind of reactive measures as well as just the kind of routine annual maintenance measures as well. So go ahead, next slide, unless there's no questions on this. I don't want to take it again. All right. Quick view into community development. We wanted to provide a little bit more kind of slicing up the information based off of the types of community development activity, specifically with permitting activity. as well as inspections as well, because community development kind of touches a lot of different program functions as well. So we'll go ahead and look at year-to-date permit applications and the status of those permits. So overall, this number is kind of semi-polluted by the fact that we had a significant land development application that went into its kind of active period for the elementary school for Kennet Consolidated School District here for New Garden Elementary. So some of these are skewed kind of just by having that inherited kind of amount of volume of activity for that function alone. Of course, we include some numbers in here as well that to kind of discludes the school as well. But you can't discount it just because it's one big project, because if you have a lot of big projects going on, it's just part of your annual volume anyway. So we're just showing the numbers as is. And you can also kind of see right now, we're not really showing this on a year over year, mostly because we didn't have anybody really tracking this on a year over year basis prior to it because of just the status of what our community development function was, or in this case wasn't. So this is just to be able to get the first kind of year-over-year trend moving forward from where we started measuring at the beginning of the year. So planning to move forward, we're going to do measurement of individual types of month-over-month statuses as well as permit types in a very consistent basis so you can track any trends and, of course, address any needs as possible. Here are the numbers without the school. So the kind of volumes kind of somewhat aligned. It's just you can see kind of the scale on the amount, and I think we go to the full amount here, the totals with the schools and without the schools. So just so everybody knows, we have a third-party inspector service, which is building inspection underwriters. There are their fees absorbed as well as the township fees. So it's kind of like two fee structures that go into the total amount of revenue provided. And then, of course, from an expenditure level, you kind of take like a 50% cutoff from there in terms of expenditures. And that's kind of how that model works out. So not all revenue goes directly to the township. A significant portion of that goes just to provide the inspection services in and of itself. And that's by code, because right now our code requires that we have a third-party provider do our inspection services. But the good news is a lot of them are paid, so that's good. So that's kind of what you want to see is kind of a clearance rate as well as a payment rate. And those are the things that we're starting to do a lot more review on in terms of just anything that we're not seeing, having this be smaller because of the dedicated assets, in this case, the ones that we don't really have, to kind of do those more arduous reviews, kind of audits on the kind of non-payment and stuff. It's one where you can kind of go down the rabbit hole, and those can take a tremendous amount of time, energy, and effort to do. So the good news is we don't have to dedicate a lot of time towards that. We're kind of living more in this kind of paid and active in completing it. And then, of course, really, it's just kind of giving you a sense of the types of permits which we're seeing kind of across the board. They're pretty much the same kind of levels across, consistent with what I would consider to be normal scaled residential commercial building activity. These are our top types. So these are just kind of by category moving down. But once again, nothing really kind of outside the norm that we're seeing. It's just based off of the types of functional development we're seeing. This is kind of what we should be seeing. It was very interesting that we actually, I don't know if people just saw that bad weather was coming or they were expecting it, but actually when we got the worst amount of weather in the township, we didn't have, sometimes people will apply for one after an event, not before it. But I also think this is because we had a lot of really bad weather from prior months as well. I think a lot of people just kind of got caught up like, I kind of need a generator. I don't know if that's more of a referendum on PICO at all, but that's one where I think a lot of people kind of saw the need for self-reliance. So we did see a significant kind of spike in generator permits. And then just kind of tracking overall deck and patios are kind of the more, I'll call it predominant type of residential type permit that we get. This is also pretty much consistent with what we're seeing. So really nothing here you're seeing is kind of outside the norm, but it's just good to get kind of a benchmark. And like I said, this will be more useful when we get that year-over-year trend information. So you can see, oh, you know, last year we saw it this time, but this year we're seeing it different. There's something happening right now. I think they said you could chase the economic conditions based off of the performance of Home Depot. Maybe this might be something that we can as well. I don't know. This is more for our fire marshal function. So our building, commercial building inspection, fire inspections. You can see the predominant one that we get, and this is because of the agricultural industry that we get. So mushroom production, this is a lot of on-site storage requirements for them for their process. And so it means it's the #1 inspection that we service for our commercial building sub. So you can see. And then in terms of just the life safety inspections that we're doing, It was advertised kind of where we're trying to benchmark for possible fire code revenue. We're seeing it pretty consistent with what we expected, which is more of a function of, this isn't a massive revenue return, but it's more of a preventative life safety function for the township as well, which is the fire marshal, International Fire Code inspection service that we provide for commercial buildings.
So Chris, the ammonia is used for the coolers.
Yeah, that's correct.
So it's basically, it's not part of the growing process. It is, and Christie just asked, so I'm just gonna explain. It's part for the cold storage.
Yep.
So they bring them in and sort of flash cool them.
Yeah, it's those large scale chillers, I guess, that they have.
And for years, some of the ammonia tanks are 250-pound cylinders.
Yeah.
So they would need a permit under the, whatever the regulation that covers that.
Then last but not least, for community, I think it's last but not least, yeah, code enforcement. So part of our community development function is enforcement of the property maintenance code as well. So a lot of it is just, think of this as kind of one big piece of the pie, but we get it kind of split up into categories. So this doesn't mean this is a total. So we're going to continue to kind of fine tune our visual display of data here, but think of it like all complaints come in, only certain complaints convert into notices of violation. And then from there, they kind of escalate from there. So it's good to kind of know that we get a lot of volume of just people providing issues to the township. And then we have to go through a pretty strict review process, which is number one, does this merit a follow-up based off of our review of it? So complaint for us means that we have somebody going out there, looking at it and going, this is a legit complaint, we're going to issue a notice of violation. And then from there, then we issue different types of warnings for lack of response to the NOVs, and then of course, escalate from there. So that's kind of where we look at it as a, right now, the bulk majority of the effort is in this phase and this phase, because once it gets kind of more into the, I'll call it possible escalation to like a local magistrate type process for enforcement of like a civil code penalty, it's less incumbent upon the township to do all of the ground kind of level work, and it's more of just scheduling. It's more of a solicitor type function at that point, where things are kind of handed off into more of a legal review process. And that's one where we provide support for that, but we're not driving it when it gets to that point, if that makes sense. Then of course, we have our rental inspection program that we kicked up in the beginning of January 2024, based off of last year's approval of the rental inspection ordinance for registrations for rental properties. And you can just see that these are kind of very basic habitable space, life safety type style inspections, where we are seeing kind of based off the volumes right now to date. I think we got a pretty big bump because we got one property that was inclusive of multiple units as well, and it's a per unit basis. And it's one where we're still exploring other properties to get them registered and get them in compliance, where I think revenue-wise, seasonally, it'll be based off of, like, if we just front-loaded all of the registrations at the beginning of the year, they're annual, so you won't really see any activity. So tracking it from a month over month is kind of less conducive. It's more of just totality of total units and a percentage of total units that are registered. That's more of a better outcome for measurement there. But that's kind of basic things where you'll see a lot of like, fire extinguishers haven't been inspected. Those are kind of the more intermittent type issues that you see. Or fire detectors out of batteries are not working, non-operable. Those are kind of the more basic things that you see house to house. So parks and open space, we haven't been tracking this mostly because I'm talking about volume of activity of maintenance of spaces, mostly because this year was the first year that we had beyond just one person kind of reacting to trying to all the issues in the township. But it's when we're gonna, as we approve this year, a kind of like a full 6-month seasonal employee to work in concert with our full-time employee. We're able to kind of better have an allocation of kind of parsing out the work effort. So you can send kind of people in multiple directions and then also track the work better as well. Because before it was just, if you're reacting to that issue of the day, you just kind of go out there and you would react to that as a body of one, and then you would come back and that would be like 100% pie chart. I just worked on this today kind of thing. So as we add the ability to support maintenance with more bodies, you can get better understanding of where the body of effort is, because contiguously within the township of 16 square miles, we have about 400 acres plus of just net kind of open space and active recreation maintained areas. And that's conducive of trails as well. So I think it's about 300 acres total amongst the big 3 kind of park spaces, ones that we have kind of active use on, which is New Garden Park. We already have people occupying and using the golf course, and then even down in New Garden Hills. And of course, that's one where the day-to-day effort kind of shifts based off of what we have to clean up or kind of work on. And don't even get me talking about post-storm event cleanup, but that's kind of how we have to partition work here. So you can see grounds maintenance, trail maintenance, event supports. This is kind of their overarching pie chart here, where we're going to go into kind of from an individual facilities where they focus more of their attention on. So from a facilities thing, our park bathrooms is kind of the number one thing they have to draw attention to, which makes sense. But you can also see that's part of a much lighter effort as well. So it's one where if you kind of think about for a maintenance perspective, if you're going to say, hey, we need to kind of come up with a barrier, this would be a strategy to say we should draw attention to what's going wrong with our park bathrooms first. So that's kind of what you get out of this exercise. From a grounds perspective, Smedley Preserve, this was just for the month of July. So as we add more data to this, we're going to continue to say that this is going to be more of a cumulative effect. And so going forward, we can track it seasonally, we can track it monthly, we can track it on the whole entire year. But July was very stormy. So essentially one of the biggest active park areas that we had the most amount of cleanup effort required was Smedley Preserve, because there were just a lot of trees and damage and stuff that came down in that storm. So we had to address that first. We did have a good amount at New Garden Park as well, but that's one where we actually, from our individual staff labor, we didn't attack that with staff. We attacked that, we had to contract out for a separate vendor to go do that one as well. So we're still not really fully capacitized to encumber 400 acres plus of property with 1.5 people.
Chris, how's the carry in, carry out policy working?
Just in terms of day-to-day, so all of the bulk item issues, essentially the reason that it was constructed in the first place was to get rid of bulk item dumping in the park in of itself. So people were bringing in appliances and other kinds of things and just dumping them by the trash can. So that's 100% reversed. It doesn't happen anymore. And so the other issue was with dog waste. It was one where there was already dog waste bags being left behind around the site. So it's already an issue, even though there was a receptacle to put it in. That's still at the same level of volume. And in fact, I think there's some, I'll call them like people pushing back against and intentionally leaving bags, knowing that they just don't want to do the carry and carry out. So that's kind of where we're at right now. So the day-to-day, you wouldn't see a difference between before or after of more or less from like a pet waste kind of thing. But in terms of the bulk storage dumping, that's completely gone. So from an effectiveness standpoint, I would say it was extremely effective. And plus now we're not doing grounds maintenance where we're going around the park and spending hours a day, because this would be a skew chart where we would still have to carve out a bulk amount of time just cleaning up the grounds for things that aren't caused by an active godstorm or something like that. In terms of trails, these are the kind of networks of trails that we have and the primary kind of attention that it draws. Like I said, 400 contiguous acres, but I would say about 100 acres of that is just kind of net trail networks as well. So it's just one where that's one where it's accessibility, you got to get in there. It can take a lot of your day. The types of maintenance you have to do also depends upon the equipment that you have to service it. So it's also one we're exploring, especially in the FY25 capital plan, of doing kind of like a, you know, can we get one person with a really good tool set to go in there and do this really, really fast and efficiently, rather than just kind of the way we currently do, which is everybody out of the truck, you grab your weed whackers and you walk 100 acres of trails just to clean and manicure it. Because this isn't like a volunteer-led effort. It's still done by staff, cleaning everything up. At the airport, also, everything is kind of tracking seasonally for what we had expected for year-end projections when it comes to both fuel sales, maintenance shop revenue, as well as use of our flight school as well. So everything is kind of tracking kind of in seasonality with multiple years. So this is one where we did track this data pretty extensively in the past. So we're able to kind of see, it's like, you know, we're kind of in the mean right there for July's performance specifically. But overall, we're very strong in our performance, and you'll see that in the year-end projections for revenue for the airport as well, at least when it comes to fuel sales, which that's kind of the one where it defines the amount of use of the actual runway environment and of itself, because you're buying fuel, you're going to take off kind of thing. That's kind of the correlation there. Same thing with flight hour totals, but that's more of us and our flight school component, which is a component of inclusive of fuel sales revenue, but just also, you know, activity at the runway itself. Maintenance shop is a different function. That's more of these are all of your dedicated maintainers that you have, where people will literally fly into our township from around the area as well as regionally and kind of nationally as well. And they'll just pick us as, this is my garage and I'm going to stand to do my maintenance here. because that's the convenient part about an airport. It's not like a car. If, if I'm gonna go get some, new tires and stuff in my car, I'm gonna go most local convenient thing for an an aircraft. You can fly to where you want to get something done. And of course, these are just some updates from, of course, over the summer. So we had the Future Aviators Camp, which you can see kind of, this is the counselors. I think this is the beginning of the summer. This is the end of the summer one, because we had 2 hosted aviators camps this year. Strongly attended and forced, they all assuming the registrations were fully at 100%, plus they actually had to kind of deny ones because we didn't have room for them. But they had a really great week, even in combating some weather as well as some TFRs, but overall successful camping weeks. And I think the people attending the camps would probably provide the most strong endorsement of their experience at the airport. So that was really good. And then, of course, from the, I only pulled in some imagery from the drone show, but the air show was extremely well attended. It was a successful event. And it's one where I think the kind of public access to seeing the airfield is kind of tantamount to the success of the airport of itself. So it was a strong seasonal show there. Just in administration, this is more how we measure kind of interest in the township from our communication standpoint. So really you can see some kind of correlations between some events and then some non-correlations ones. So it's interesting, YouTube still holds the record in March. This was the air quality study provided by the state. So this still holds the title of the single most interesting thing to people to watch about our township on YouTube. But then as you just kind of look at across the board for Facebook engagement, for events, as well as website engagement, you'll see kind of the same consistent numbers all along the fall timeframe. That was, of course, for budgeting workshops and stuff about kind of the township's plans approach for FY24 planning. Probably the same thing for 25. In July, we saw a significant amount of post reach. That was just all the storm activities. We're giving updates, road closures, you name it. So that's also in concert with us communicating public works messaging as well. And you just see a lot of people circulating that stuff around. So that's the number one item there. On the website, it's pretty much, it kind of stays pretty consistent. So you might get most of your engagement here. And that's why we kind of say that Facebook is our number one message release function right now, because it gets to the most amount of people, because you can see what's at the top end here. And then this, if we provide messages with links to township website, you kind of see a little bit less, but it's still kind of consistent with what we see in our engagement. So just some other admin highlights. We're implementing, we had it as a prior service, but it wasn't at the full scale of what it could provide, but we're working on essentially defining like a kind of comprehensive financial transparency, as well as kind of onboarding kind of complete staff operating budgeting software right now, as well as the ability to commission an actual finalized budget book. And that's part of the ongoing process right now. So we're still aiming to have that fully implemented by the end of the year. And then the online citizen reporting tool, I provided a public update about that at the last meeting. Essentially think of that as a 311 kind of input process for people to report complaints in the townships regarding all kind of categories of issues. And it's kind of like a web-based map kind of functional tool where you can kind of go on a map, drop a pin on an area, attach like an image to the issue that you want to provide from your cell phone, and then just fill out maybe like a 2 or 3 kind of prompted list questionnaire of pick a category, pick your issue, submit, and then maybe a brief note about it. And that goes directly to staff. And now we have the kind of easier cleanup of information going into the system to help develop reporting about what we're seeing in the township. So that's ongoing. And then, of course, you saw the zoning ordinance project that was done prior to this meeting, and then Act 209, which is kind of contingent right now upon the timeline of the zoning project as well. But both projects are in full progress right now. Any questions about this? I know people always have kind of like a communications, kind of what's happening, what the pulse is, but it correlates with things that we know that's happening in the township. So it'd be strange if we saw things completely out of sequence and out of the normal function of things. So in part of the grant resolution, and this is just kind of an overall grants Smedley project update, because this is the focal point of our attention right now, because we're submitting a significant amount of them. So all inclusive, what we're looking for is what is the most amount of funding that we can secure from the state at all different levels that kind of correlate with different aspects of the project that leaves the least amount of funding required for the township to provide as a local match. And then have that add up to the total request amount in buckets of phased kind of project implementation schedules. And then our local match is 100% funded through the open space fund. So that's kind of how we're doing it. So it doesn't come out of our capital cash component of as well. It's seen as that this is an open space provided project, and open space revenue should be the #1 funding resource to help get it across the finish line for a nominal township match. So that's the strategy. I believe we'll start hearing back from, I think I can't remember if it's the Arley grant or application, the Greenways, Trails, and Recreation Grant's the first one we're going to hear about probably in October timeframe, as well as the multimodal transportation grant. And this is for, if you think multimodal, it's the pathway, it's a lot of the pedestrian improvements at the intersection of Church Road and the golf cart crossing. It's the parking lot in of itself. It's those kind of functional pedestrian elements to it. And then, of course, the Greenways and Trails is kind of just all-encompassing for just improvement for other types of things in the park, signage, you name it, across the board for what we have identified in the master plan. So those are the ones that actually require township matches. The LSA grant's the big one that we want to hunt for because that's no match and it goes up to $1 million. And so we are actively working with our state representatives and senators to be active to the Commonwealth Financing Authority, not just submission of an actual letter of support, but making phone calls, because that's one where we can get a significant contribution from the state to help complete that grant. Any questions about this? And then the narrative back is that we're doing these open space projects, but we're funding with open space funding. And then, of course, as strategy gets executed and we get less funding, we'll kind of have to come up with an approach that will only elongate the timeline so we can keep this at the lowest amount possible. So we can do this on a 1 to 2 year time frame if the numbers are like this. If it's double, triple, then we're just going to have to make it a 2-year project to like a 4-year project and just do it in smaller buckets. And that's about it. So real quick kind of update. I don't know if you have any inputs to continue kind of track other information that you'd be interested in, but this is just essentially an update for also intentional preliminary budgeting stuff as well in terms of just funding capacity increases ability to track performance, and that's kind of the ins and outs there. And then any comments from the public?
No, any comments? Anyone from you guys? No?
Helpful, I like the approach with the grant.
Any questions from the public? No? Okay. All right, and then next up we have the New Garden Township fiscal year 2024 A1 budget amendment.
To start talking here. Okay. All right, so good evening once again. This is another manager update right now for the FY24 budget amendment. So I categorize them as A1. So hopefully it's just an A1. If it was a second amendment, A2, A3, A4, hopefully you only stay at a 1 given the size and capacity of our current budget. But this is also one where we've already done kind of a deliberate discussion about the need for an amendment, mostly about capital, because we've had a significant change to our capital plan based off of a strategy of use of rollover surplus from last year, as well as some updates in terms of like what is considered to be viable versus non-viable from some engineering updates that we got at the kind of midpoint of the summer. And then, of course, in order to continue with that plan, we needed to update the current budget, which had a significant part of these projects inclusive in FY24, as well as some bleed over into 25. So tonight, it's going to be all encompassing. You'll see some minor tweaks and changes because technically they abide by the, if you have to tweak it by more than 10% of the line item, or it's forecast to be then, you want to amend those line items as well too. So this kind of captures everything. So, let me see. All right. So we'll start with the general fund, everyone's favorite fund. So in terms of the general fund, Really, overall, it's kind of a success story of our community development department, if you want to think of it. So in order to absorb the amount of influx of revenue we got mostly for building permits, we have to amend the budget because a lot of the initial forecasted items were essentially blown out of the water. Not necessarily just by the schools, but also we're seeing a higher level of permit activity that we forecast beyond just our own original projections. And that's, of course, capacity and personnel and the ability to kind of get more eyes out there to be able to get the messaging that we're, requiring these things moving forward. So more enforcement behind it as well. We're seeing more people come to town hall to get all permits across all categories, not just quote unquote the most noticeable ones that you might see. So that's good. But in order to absorb that revenue increase, which of course, this is a function of having a community development team, you also have to understand that you have to raise expenditures because a big portion of that revenue goes out the door to our building inspection underwriter service as well. So overall, we're essentially just amending the planned surplus. So if we kicked off the beginning of the year, it was with $199,000 baked in surplus. About 80,000 of that was township cash to kind of balance the budget because of the way we did our forecast increase for real estate property tax. And what we pulled down from our interest income, that was the remnant portion. So really it's a surplus, but about 80 grand of that is still township cash. So really instead of saying 346, it's more of, if I can do the mental math in my head right now, more of 270, if you want to think of it like that. And of course, these are the functional categories where you're seeing kind of the biggest jumps there. So part of the overall kind of rundown in public safety charges you're seeing is essentially across the board for each individual type of permit category, as well as we also got kind of a random donation for recreation services. I can't remember if that was for the story walk in the library. Stream arming for the trail in New Garden. Yep. So we still do get random kind of like unforecastable donations in there, and we just kind of park it in parks donations revenue. So that line item is usually set at 0 as non-expected revenue. It comes in dependent upon the size of the donation. So somebody giving $10,000 to the park is significant, as well as the airport management fee. So what we do is we charge an administrative labor function of having our finance staff and kind of support the airport in terms of finalization of their budget as well. And that's one that was preliminary set at a one level, and we adjusted it based off of the personnel time, energy, and effort done towards that. So we want to charge them accordingly, not just at a script board. So that's just what it was. It was at 30,000. It got brought down to 26,000. So not a significant reduction when you talk about the total amount. And then in terms of expenditures, of course, this one is kind of the biggest jump for building inspection services, as well as we onboarded a new personnel for this year, our assistant zoning officer, but we hired them a month later. So it was just, it's seen as a cost positive because we actually didn't have that full expenditure. As well as you'll see that we are amending the budget to actually reduce the current amount of existing parks staffing component for labor charges to the open space budget. So it's one where setting up the beginning of the year, Act 32 allows for a 25% usage of X. In this case, we did the in-year revenue. So 25% of that was estimated to be about 125,000. We're now advocating to approve the adjustment to use 25% of the fund balance amount. So that gives an additional capacity to say, okay, cool, we can actually further reduce the cost on our general fund and move that expense to the open space fund. So it only allows us to reduce the cost of having, we'll call it cost of maintenance for open space charged to the general fund, if that makes sense. It's shifting that more to be more aligned with, this is for what we have to provide non-open space maintenance support and open space maintenance support. So that was that. We had a budget amount that we paid for actually in 2023 for the cost contract for Brandywine Valley's ASPCA, essentially for animal control services. And this is just the adjustment based off of just the in-year amount of animals that we've had kind of go through that as well. So it's one where I can't remember what the actual fee schedule is per case, but they do kind of a layered amount of charges for it. It's like the dedicated just processing, I say processing because that sounds heartless there, but essentially getting the case provided to them for whatever animal was called for them, but you also get charged for the person as well. So you get like stacked with 3 individual charges. So that was part of the contract agreement. So that was that. Of course, for manager as well. The biggest part of this is professional consulting services. When we start doing a lot of these budget elements for economic development analysis, that comes at a cost for consultant fees. So this is just adjusting that budget up on the manager line item, so we have the capacity to do that review as well. So it's just upping the budget line item because it was set, I think even at 0, we didn't have any planned things, so it just needed to be bumped up. And then as well as my own healthcare plan change provider as well, so apologies to everybody, but I had to jump off my former military health plan. So if anybody has any questions about that, happy to talk about it. And then, of course, the remnant charge for processing of the clock in the room here, the increase of the store commission line item as well. While I'm at it, any questions about general fund? Pretty straightforward and just kind of some nominal stuff here and there. Capital fund, where things get a little interesting, and this is where we had a lot of shuffling around of project priorities. So really, you'll see a lot of it kind of being a net even because we balance our capital fund with the cash amount that we allocate towards it. So whatever changes, we just change the cash amount. So the total net revenues expenditures kind of stay even with each other. So we always will have kind of a zero surplus plan because we're trying to not save, or excuse me, we're not trying to bank on a surplus that's 100% our township cash, if that makes sense. That's not a surplus, that's just your own cash that you got. So with that, you'll see kind of the bigger areas that we did, and the biggest one was the rollover surplus income. If you remember the original budget, it was about 300,000. So this is how much we're dumping back into for use of interest income. The biggest component of that is the rollover interest that we have from FY23, which I think is about $960 some odd thousand, and we'll look at that here in a second, as well as some adjustments in our grants, and then of course a massive reduction. So we were going to be tentatively using this amount of township cash, and now we're halving that. So we're preserving as much cash capital because we need to stretch this out for a few years to preserve our cash position for supplementing projects that we can get from interest, that we can get from grants, that we can get from our transfer of revenues from general fund to support building and continuing to build the capital cash reserve position. But you don't want to have that tip into a point where you're using too much cash where you can't replace, if that makes sense. And then of course, where that all is going, which for the fleet and facilities, this is for the town hall roof. You saw a net reduction in administration, and we'll go into that as well as the paving program. Essentially, that's a function of adding in some public works projects, reduction in the storm plan because of the feasibility of those storm projects, as well as all but removing the cost of New Garden Hill, specific in this one, Smedley Preserve, out of the capital fund. So we're no longer doing these projects as functions of the capital improvement fund. We're doing it as a function of the open space fund, if that makes sense. So with that, your net savings is your own cash you already had. And then the other one is, that's correct, the grant for the former New Garden Hills Phase 2 project, which you remember that was that like stream bank corridor improvement as well as parks planning, and then we kind of put the halt on that for last year. We still had a grant from DCD to support that project. Granted, it was nowhere near the scale required to execute the project. We're taking that and we're moving it outside the lines a little bit to enhance the Route 41 component for essentially making the entryway in off of Limestone Road into the park that supports the current Kaolin Trail just safer. And that's kind of what that is. So it's almost a 1-for-1. So the grant offsets the expense of doing that project. All right, so we'll go on to the actual line items here. So all of these should be elements of the capital fund where we've already talked about. So nothing should be a surprise here, and you can let me know if it is. But for the public works reconstruction and rebuild line, we added Pemberton Road. So this is the cost of Pemberton Road. We increase, and when you talked about that public works facilities, the fuel farm, that was that cost increase. It was more than double the amount. Half of that's, oh, not half of that, a portion of that's being supported, a little bit less than half actually, by ARPA funding. So it's still kind of seen as a 50-50 expense. It's more like 40-60. And then we have it from a budgeted perspective, the need to order equipment that was approved in the 24 capital plan, but the first payment doesn't start until 25. So technically, and you'll see that in the agenda item tonight, we're still planning to do that. It's just the actual first payment's not due to 25. So technically it has to come out of the 24 plan because we're not having a financial hit on that for FY24. We already talked about the fleet and facilities being a reflection of the town hall roof. Stormwater management, that was one where you saw the, it was a minus 90K, but in actuality, that was a minus like 350K for the Wilkinson Road culvert, assuming Wilkinson Drive culvert there. So even the 90K reduction wasn't even necessarily accurate of what the cost expense was there in the first place. And then we already talked about the Parks and Recreation component of it. And then you just have some smaller ones based off of the fact that our administrative projects are funded through capital cash with grant supporting it, but it's a 2-year process. So we're going to get incurred kind of 24 and 25. So it was just making it accurate from a budget perspective. The airport fund, pretty success story there in terms of revenue, in terms of increasing for airport fees. A lot of that was in frontage for avionics sales about our Garmin installations, as well as the consolidation effort that we did. So really, it's kind of like a consolidation of multiple revenue line items to go into one single line item to service the flight school, which we have all of these kind of support the flight school. So it wasn't like a net massive increase. It was an increase and a reallocation to consolidate line items, if you could think of it like that. So as we zeroed out other line items, we just added it to one because it's easier to administer financial transactions with our staff that we have in place. See here, the expenditures done on the air show is a reflection of the scale and magnitude and success of the air show. So we had to increase air show fees, but we also had to increase expenses in order to support it, because that's not a fully subsidized event. You know, it's always going to be one where you try to get revenue recovery, but it's always one where you're going to be at a net less 100%. But then you just have your kind of overarching impact of it. This is just for the general fund, not capital. We're still amending to increase the surplus level just to a higher level there for the end of the year revenue projection. So overall, still a good story in the tracking. And then capital fund, this is more a reflection that we took one project and we moved it to 25. And that's with the runway and lighting and the PAPIs, which if you remember from the capital plan, I don't know if you remember it or not, essentially it's the visual aid used to do instrument approaches down to the runway environment. That was going to be done this year. It's being moved to FY25 start. Then in the open space fund, this is just one where we talk about the net change of that strategy with subsidizing open space funds to support labor efforts done by staff right now. So this is just more a reflection of that. Otherwise, no change to it. So we're just increasing that level of in-year funding to support that. And the plan for 25 moving forward, which has been briefed to the Open Space Review Board, is to continue that process moving forward. And it's to leverage it as an asset to kind of, like I said, better align labor efforts and use that as a resource for offsetting impact to the general fund, while still maintaining capacity to execute like the open space mission as well. So net fund impact, kind of looking at the big picture, the overall adjustment for everything because of the level of surplus interest income being used to support capital, and because of the amount of expenditure increases for supporting BIU services, because of the revenue increases for processing permits, kind of the net lift is up, but it's at no real impact to using additional cash position too. So it's just the performance of the township reflective of fees and interest and stuff like that. So really kind of the net increase is kind of seen as a net win. And so what I would say is the planned surplus is, number one, carve out any budgeted cash, then look at the net surplus amount. And really that's something to start thinking about for year end, is what is the best use for that plan in year accrued revenue, true revenue as a surplus amount that it's dedicated for what? And that's what I want to start the board to start thinking about. Is it something that you want to see in rollover? We just kind of earmark this and it kind of helps, you know, FY25 jumps and increases for services, wherever that ends up being, to kind of net out that impact of just the planned expenditure jump, because the issue is still out there that we're still using a significant amount of interest to plug our budget. And that's one where part of last year's discussion was part of that kind of 2-year implementation plan for the kind of net increase that we were talking about. That still hasn't gone away magically. It's still very much present. It's just one where if we continue to use interest, we just will then need to adjust capital expectations to move it back down. Because that's one where the original plan was to have it as a 1-year temporary use to kind of lean out the impact. And then really we're kind of moving into all right, now we're looking at the performance increases for revenues. Now we're looking at surplus created this year to support that. We're looking at everything holistically to say, you know, what is the net result for FY24 that actually impacts the plan for 25 moving forward, now that we have a better understanding of what our township performance looks like as a whole for revenues. So I think that's it. Any questions? And of course, the amendment tonight would be to amend the budget to the net expenditure amount. which is actually in the agenda.
With the most likely rate cuts coming from the Fed, are you looking at putting a large amount of the cash away for a longer time to kind of maintain that surplus, or are you just going to kind of write it down?
So for current needs, the cash shortage, because the issue right now is the fact that we don't have enough extra cash generated to do capital.
Right.
So that's one where if you want to do projects, right now, interest income is your best bet. Liquid fuels is the second biggest pot of funding coming to that. And your capital cash is usable but not replaceable based off of revenue coming in that's then transferred to capital reserve. So we're not sending enough revenue towards capital as well. So really, it's just pick your priority. If it's to say that this is kind of burn it to its exhaustion and keep it to keep taxes low, then I would say your priority should be to keep it in general fund, knowing that as interest rates decline, which is good for home buyers, but bad for the township and our strategy, it's one where it's a diminishing return because we'll get less and less and less and less. So we'll only have to find more and more revenue from where. Now, the hope is and has always been to get these development projects across the finish line. You know, we've already moved two projects, I think one project into finalization for the Bancroft development. I think Thompson Properties right behind that, but that takes time to see the revenue return for that. And then that's another one where, you know, how much do you really kind of see as a net lift or, and when you're going to see it. So likely based off of the delay, you probably won't see that revenue until 26 going into 27. So I don't know if you'll see that in 25. Maybe some of the permit activity, but not the actual sales and the transfer tax and the local services tax and the residential property taxes and commercial taxes as well too. Because those are the only ones that we have approved that we haven't seen yet.
You guys have any questions?
So I guess we have to amend it because it's an increase of more than 10%.
Yes.
Revenue and expenditures, and it's for specific line items. So, in looking at next year, do we see any potential tax increase? And this would be amending this budget.
Yep.
Without a tax increase. It's just the revenues and
There's no
expenditures.
change to anything needed in terms of required revenue to support this year's budget. In fact, this way, we're seeing other things come out of other plans to support not needing the, like essentially, we don't need extra revenue to support this year's budget.
Right.
Now, that's also one where we're eating into that margin with revenue growth of that, because remember, we used $911,000 of budgeted interest income for this year's budget. We're still using that.
Correct.
This revenue is eating into that a little bit. So what if it does is it might actually preserve a little bit of in-year interest. And then we're going to look at the savings in this year and say, what is the best use of that? But that doesn't negate the fact that you still have kind of a net gap that you're still solving for. And right now, what is your priority? Is your priority to say, well, if this is for general fund expenditures, what is the best revenue source to fund general fund operations? And predominantly, that is sustainable revenue. So that comes sourced from taxes for the most part for second-class townships, as well as fees for service. Those are your primary mechanisms that you have. And then capital, it's kind of like you want to align buckets of revenue per type of functions provided to the locality. So intermittent revenues like interest, like cash, like grants, you want to have that kind of push towards capital projects. But if you start kind of shifting things out of the way, now you have to make decisions based off of what's the priority. Is the priority to keep taxes low? Then yes, roll over the interest, continue using it and everything. But that will come at a net reduction in capital. That's the outcome. There's no lever that pulls everything. Otherwise, we just get a massive revenue surplus built into massive economic growth, but we don't have that forecast right now because of the projects that have been approved.
And we're on schedule for everything. I think the only project I saw was the airport pulled back that one capital project. But as far as public works and
Everything that was amended in the capital plan is subject to approval based off of the outcome here, because technically, like even the next 3 items in the agenda right now are contingent, somewhat contingent on this approval. Yep.
that's all the questions I have.
Okay.
Anyone else? Any
So
question?
You need a motion to amend the
Well,
budget.
Let's see if the public has questions. Anyone from the public? No? Yeah, right.
Keep up the good work. Overachiever.
Okay.
So I'll make a motion that we amend the 24 budget. And the amendment would be, the new total would be $15,418,160.73, correct?
Yes.
That's my motion.
I'll second.
Okay, any other further discussion? No? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Yep.
One,
right.
one comment. Thank you, Chris. That was very understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then we have Public Works Fuel Farm.
Hey, Kenny, good job with that storm.
Thank you. Yes. Sorry, this isn't as appealing as what Chris just went through, but as he mentioned in the amendment update, we've been looking at replacing our fuel farm. Once he gets it up, we got two different quotes through the Sourcewell program, which is very similar to CoStarz, and the fact that we don't have to go out and bid it and do bid documents and all that stuff. So it's a much more cost-effective way to do it. Although it was more expensive than what we initially had thought. $230,000 of it is the ARPA funding money that we had left over from years past, and then the rest Chris outlined on the breakdown in the amendment. Did you guys have any questions about that?
Yeah. Okay. No, looks good. Okay, do we have a motion to approve?
Yeah, I'll make the motion that we approve, and we're gonna go with the quote from Haffer Equipment.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones that are ultimately going to do the work. Blue One Energy is the one that is the vendor that is on the Sourcewell program. The guy was on vacation from Hafer last week. He just came back today, actually. So he is working on getting me an actual, it's going to be the same individual details, just the letterhead is going to be from Blue One Energy versus Hafer. So we're going to actually write the check to Blue One Energy when it's all said and done, but Hafer's going to do the work.
So we should just do it with the condition of not to exceed, Chris?
Yeah.
Correct, yeah, this would be, and Hafer is a Sourcewell writer, I think, of Blue One as a listed vendor, and so think of it like a subcontractor
Yep.
component of it, but Hafer will be the one actually performing all of the work, and it costs not to exceed of 584.
Make the motion that we authorize the township manager and the public works director to finally, 15, 20 years later,
Something like that, yeah. It seems like it anyway.
the number of not to exceed 584,000, and that is a complete remodel and replacement of the fuel farm at the public works facility, which is on Route 2.
Correct.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. All right, any other further discussion? No? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Yep.
Thank you.
You. Okay, then why don't you hang on up here and we'll check out your vehicle purchase.
Sure. And as part of the 2024 fiscal year budget, we did have in the budget a truck replacement, which would ultimately replace the 2005 F-250 that we have. It would be a 2024 F-350 with lettering, lighting, the radio, and then upfitting another truck that we have to kind of balance things out a little bit on normal wear and tear on each vehicle. So the total of that would be 108,657.41 over 5 years, because we're going to do the financing through Fidelity Bank, I believe.
It was the same vendor that we looked at for the Public Safety Commission for financing the police vehicles as well. We're getting a very competitive rate with them. It's also one where this is actually a net reduction in the plan for annual financing that we had originally budgeted for. So I think it was a savings of about
7,000, I think it was.
7,000
yeah.
per year net, because we're just going to continually add all of the kind of 5-year financing constructs to the same product.
I recall just a couple of years ago, we were showing dramatic increases in the cost of these vehicles. Have you seen that taper off or anything?
It has seemed to taper off, yes. When we got this quote, because we were up against the order deadline where they're going to shut down orders and transition to 2025 orders, they only forecasted about $1,000 increase between 24 model year and 25 model year. Now, that's a guess, but he said that's kind of what it's been tracking the last few years, as opposed to thousands and thousands of dollars like it was back in 2020, 2021.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's good to hear. Okay. Any other comments? We have a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve. In the amount of not to exceed $100,067.41.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Yep.
Thank you again.
All right, thank you. And last but not least, line painting.
Yes, last but not least, line painting. So we normally bid this through the co-op every year. They did a publication in late March and then again in early to mid-April, I believe it was. Both times, nobody put in for it. So per second class township code, now we can go with basically whoever we want. We are using the company that's done it for the last several years. They said they just didn't see it for whatever reason. They're out of Chambersburg and we use a local paper. So maybe that's why they just, I don't know if they had turnover and the person didn't look or what, but it actually is a decrease over last year's linear foot cost, which kind of surprised me. So that's a good thing.
Okay. All right.
Well, I'll make a motion to approve line painting services for Alpha Space Control at an amount not to exceed $32,250.
Okay. Okay, any other discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny.
And it just like Chris mentioned earlier, the paving should be wrapped up on Thursday of this week, hopefully. As of right now, everything is tracking well within budget. I think I was 21 tons off of what we needed to use on Pemberton Road today, and we used 21 tons less than what I expected, so we had like a $2,000 savings there on a $1.4 million project. That's pretty darn close.
Really?
I had a couple updates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, then we have a couple items on the manager's report.
Just as an update, so obviously tonight we put out messaging that the air quality report provided by Westchester University was originally intended to be at tonight's meeting, which after some public input, they kind of desire was to separate that into its own special meeting. So we kind of had to, number one, just get the message out that it wasn't going to be done tonight, but also explored for a future time and date to be determined. After going to the actual people who are going to be providing the material, that was the number one thing that we had to wait on. We have an update that we'll be putting out messaging here in the next days or so, which is going to be a planned special meeting for Wednesday night, September 4th at 7 o'clock here at Town Hall. And that's going to be the actual air quality study report meeting by Westchester as its own dedicated special meeting too. So we'll start getting messaging out in the public, and everybody can come to Town Hall at that time to learn more about the findings of fact from Westchester study. As another one, it's kicking off the kind of budget workshop sessions. So the preliminary one is for upcoming Monday at 7 o'clock. We'll advertise for the State of the Township FY24. We did this last year, FY23, and kind of got some positive feedback, albeit it was mostly retroactive, not people actually in attendance. So we'll do our best to kind of better communicate that the meeting's going to be done during that time frame. So come one, come all to learn about the 24 state of affairs of New Garden Township.
And that's a week from tonight.
That is 1 week from tonight here at 7 o'clock at Town Hall. And it'll be, kind of streamed live as well as recorded and put on the website as well.
All right, great.
And that's it.
All right.
That's it.
All right, then just as a reminder, the resolutions we passed were regarding the three grant resolutions. So I don't know that we need to do anything about that. It's just a reminder at the end. It's just a reminder at the end to,
Oh, that's more for tracking for clerical functions after the fact, so we can make sure that we process things accordingly.
okay. Any words of wisdom from the other supervisors? Thoughts? Words of wisdom? Okay, all right. Hearing none. Do we have a motion to adjourn? All right. Any other discussion? Nope. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Meeting is adjourned.
I got a lot done and